Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. And as of this morning, I completed the 30-day free trial from Verizon. I had activated that line, that SIM, the eSIM, 30 days ago, as of this morning. And I tested Verizon on the Google 8 Pro, right? Google Pixel 8 Pro. And I know right off the bat, I know that they don't have the best modem, right, in comparison to Qualcomm, but it still gave me an idea of how Verizon performed here. I took it to Phoenix, I took it to Vegas, right, road trip in between some highways. So I got to see how Verizon performed. And just to give you guys a review, right, I used Verizon as my primary 2017, 2018. Then I went back to AT&T, and then during 2020, the early days of COVID, I moved my primary lines to T-Mobile. That's how that went. It was Verizon first, then I went to AT&T as my primary, and then I went to T-Mobile. So back when I had Verizon, so I had Verizon as a primary like 2016, 2017. And then I also had Verizon as a primary like 2013, 2014 timeframe. Tried T-Mobile for a little bit around that time, but it just didn't work out for me. The network wasn't up to par. A lot of issues for T-Mobile around that time, calling especially. And that's when I started to slowly but surely move my primary lines to Verizon at that time. But when I first used Verizon as a primary, I moved from Sprint. I had Sprint back then. I moved to Verizon. And back then, of course, there weren't any free trials available. But you could really, really notice the difference in network and who the best network was back then, right? And I know coming from Sprint, that's kind of crazy because Sprint really didn't have a good network, right? It was 3G. There was some LTE. So to compare that to Sprint is probably not the best comparison. But I later on, tried T-Mobile. I tried AT&T when I was at Radio Shack with we were able to get dealer lines on discounts. And that's when I really saw the strength of Verizon. Like Verizon was genuinely just better. Like it wasn't even close back then. I mean, Root Metrics was showing that in the testing back then. And even though Verizon was just getting started deploying AWS during the XLTE days, for those of you who remember, you could just really tell Verizon was really just leaps and bounds ahead of the competition. And I know I said this in previous videos, but I wanted to throw that in this review as well. So, and that was the same case again, like 2016, 2017, as I started to make them my primary. They were just better. They were just a better network back then. Even comparing it to AT&T, Verizon was just much, 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 much better at that time. The reason I left Verizon at that time, moving to AT&T, it was a customer service issue. It was just horrendous. It took like 5 days to find a solution, and then even that solution was just not acceptable. So I moved to AT&T. I said, screw Verizon at that time, and I moved to AT&T because I knew T-Mobile just was not up to par at that time for me to move my primary lines to T-Mobile. So now that I've tested Verizon again for 30 days, I cannot say the same as when Verizon was first out with LTE. So yes, Verizon has a lot of C-band deployed. They're starting to put C-band on the small cells, so they're taking off the millimeter wave. They're putting C-band. That's great, but I cannot say definitively that Verizon is absolutely, genuinely the best network like they were, say 10 years ago. Just not the case. There was literally times during those times when I have Verizon where I was able to do stuff on Verizon that I was not able to do on any other network. Now that's just not the case. Anything that I was able to do on Verizon during that testing period, I was able to do on T-Mobile, and I was able to do that on AT&T as well. Now I know there's still that debate that it's location dependent, but in this case, I mean, nowadays you pick your poison, right? You pick any carrier, they all have their strengths, they all have their weaknesses, and that's just how it's going to be, right? So pick your poison. I did not feel that Verizon was leap bounds ahead anymore in this 30-day free trial that I needed to immediately move all my lines to Verizon. I felt like that during LTE. From what I saw around that time, the little bit of testing I was able to do through Radio Shack and in some of the stores, I was like, whoa, Verizon is just really, really, really ahead. And I didn't get that same feeling during this 30-day trial. I just didn't. I did calling. I tested the texting. I tested the data throughput, the upload. I mean, anything I was able to do on Verizon, I was able to do on the other carriers. Now, if there would have been like a bigger incentive for me to move, like if Verizon had like a huge discount on their top plan, something along those lines, I would probably try Verizon again because the network was good. I would try them again. But the deal that I still have with T-Mobile, and I'm tied in with a bunch of lines, home internet and all that, if the Verizon network experience was really that much better, you know, I may have considered the move to switch. But it's more similar now than it has ever been before. And even AT&T is in the mix. I compared them to AT&T in Phoenix, Vegas, here in El Paso. AT&T is in the mix now. AT&T still has some densification issues here and there where RSRP leaves a lot more to desire, right? Like you wish you had that small cell, you had that macro. But I just didn't feel like, okay, I need to up and leave to go to Verizon right now during this 30-day trial. Now, that's not to say that the Verizon experience isn't great, right? You could switch to Verizon tomorrow and have a great experience. And that might be the case, but it's like I said, you pick your poison, right? Everybody's going to increase their pricing. Everybody's more expensive next year, the year after. Verizon is doing it more blatantly. They're just increasing it. T-Mobile's trying to do it the sneaky way, right? But they're increasing price too. And AT&T will increase price as well as they see fit. They will use the pricing lever. Although I have noticed AT&T has been a bit less reluctant to try and raise price. They have done it, but not to the extent that Verizon and T-Mobile are doing it. Like there was a small plan revamp for those of you who remember, and AT&T added some naming to the end of their unlimited plans, and they increased price by like 99 cents. Right? Just subtle small increases. And that's not to say that tomorrow AT&T comes out with a statement saying they're going to raise price by $3 per line. That could very well happen. That's why I say pick your poison, right? Who's the better network in your market? I mean, that is still, of course, location dependent. You could literally go to a location and a certain network doesn't work as great. But in most cases, you can make do unless there's just no coverage or hardly any coverage at all, right? So then you look at the networks from a different perspective. Who has the larger network, right? Does Starlink end up working really well on the data when that comes out in October? It's very well possible, right? So we will continue to monitor that. But the networks are closer than ever before. And that's kind of my main point of this video, right? This review. So in areas where I saw Verizon do 600, 700, 800 on mid-band, T-Mobile was right there at 400 or 500 megabits per second. So like I said, it wasn't like, oh, I need to up and leave right now. I need to get this experience when I have the same experience on the network that I'm with, right? And from an average consumer perspective, that's how it's going to be viewed, right? Us tech enthusiasts, wireless enthusiasts, we're going to be like, whoa, you know, if Verizon shoots up to 600, 700, 800 medians on the speed on the downlink and T-Mobile is at 200, right? That's going to be a bad day. But really, if T-Mobile's doing 200 megabits, Verizon's doing 800, the experience is the same. Your stuff's going to load the same. You know, there's just more in the tank in terms of adding more people onto the network for Verizon. That's all that really means. So, again, Verizon is trying to bake in value. They're trying to bake in the promotional costs, right? They're doing acquisition costs. I mean, they're doing it all. But again, I did not feel like, oh, I need to go to Verizon right now. And trust me, I felt like that 10 years ago when T-Mobile was giving. I remember I got a Galaxy Note 5 at that time, if I remember correctly. And T-Mobile only had 2 spectrum bands deployed on LTE. It was band 4 and band 2, each of them 20 megahertz. And it was so congested. It was a mess. It was below 1 megabit in a lot of areas on each of the sectors. Calls would drop left and right. I was able to, at that time, get a hold of a regional engineer that got a hold of a local engineer. And that's when they told me they were in progress of deploying some additional money to the region to deploy those strand mounts that ended up happening. But honestly, I didn't stick around to see if that would really alleviate congestion. I'm sure for the areas where they deployed those strand mounts, it did offload some people, but I just don't think it ever made that drastic of a difference during that time. And that's when I ended up at Verizon and then at AT&T. And then I came back once the T-Mobile and Sprint merger closed, and I saw how quickly they were deploying N41. I was like, this is going to be the network to be on from a capacity speed perspective. But now that Verizon has C-band deployed on more sites, and that they will deploy more before the year's out, it's just, again, like I said, it's not that big of a difference of an experience than what I get today with T-Mobile or AT&T. So like I said, pick your poison in your area. If you have the opportunity, still do the free trial to test any network that you may want to join. But right now, it's really going to start, right? This year, they're going to deploy more. Next year, there's going to be more deployments. There's going to become a point in time where you can choose on price and deals. And I think we're arriving at that point where you can say, hey, I'm getting a cheaper price point at this carrier and the network is fine, and vice versa, right? Depending on the carrier. So we're getting to that point. So I really wonder at some point what the carrier's response is going to be, because that will also affect the carrier from a prepaid and MVNO perspective. Because if the network is getting that good, the consumer is going to have a great experience on an MVNO and on prepaid, regardless of what QCI or what network management they're putting them on. So it's going to be harder to migrate those customers from prepaid and MVNOs to postpaid because they're having such a great experience on the network at such a lower cost. That's going to get harder and harder to do so. And I know there's some people that are sticking around on postpaid because they want the better phone and all this other stuff, but eventually the consumer will catch on and they will just start buying their phones outright little by little when they can, and, you know, tax season, whatever. And then they will just put it on a prepaid plan or MVNO plan because the networks are really getting that good, even if you're on the QCI 9 priority. So that's what it's come to, in my opinion. The networks are really that close in performance. There's really not much of a difference. I know, trust me, there's still areas that Verizon totally blows, and I get the same for AT&T and the same for T-Mobile. But for the most part, right, mid-sized markets, metro areas, even suburban areas now, the performance is closer than it's ever been before. And it's going to be time to start choosing on price, value, deals, promos, whatever you can get a hold of. That's what you're probably going to have to start choosing on in the future, in my opinion. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.